The initial concept for this process was developed several years ago by Alexis McIntyre, Alan Matlenko, and Norman Mueller at Geoscience Australia, where they were looking at how could we make sure that the best possible work in all of our different agencies was brought forward and accessible nationally, and that the key problems facing our national and state and territory agencies could also be used to direct development of research and keep it going forward and open it up to a much broader community than we've had before. So that was a number of years ago. Alexis is now running the workshops here this week with me, and Shanti Reddy is also helping out, and I'll ask Alexis to say a few words in a minute as well. That's where this essentially came from. Just to clarify what we've been doing to get to today's point, if we have a look at that flow chart, in 2018, 2019, the Earth Observation for Government Network was basically put forward as a project within Geoscience Australia. It was initially called the Surface Cover Information Network, but we then transitioned the name over to one that reflected what it was doing. The first activity that project ran was in August last year, which a number of you participated in. And what we did was try to bring together Commonwealth, state and territory agencies and research groups to look at how Earth observation was being used currently, what some of the major challenges were in the short term and long term, and particularly for the government agencies, what was driving short and long term requirements for access to Earth observation-based products. And that workshop also got into discussing what the term operational meant for a number of these agencies, which is quite different as well. So that workshop, which was run over 2 days, identified a number of key, let's call them products, for want of a better word, suites, which was information being derived from Earth observation for use in government activities. So there was vegetation related information, land cover and land use, water information, topography and fire. Those were the main ones. And I know they overlap and things may not fit in the right places, but those are the ones that we sort of agreed to move forward with. The workshop that we're running this week is on the vegetation side of things. So the actual report from that, and I'll just stop and share my screen for another part of my screen for a second. The report from that particular workshop is in your participants directory online, and you can access that. I'll just show you what that looks like. So that's the report. There's an executive summary. It explains the processes that we went through, and there's all the evidence in there at the back there. And that was where we were really interested in looking at the different sort of government agencies at Commonwealth, state and territory level, and what was driving what they were doing in that area. So that's where we've come from. If you haven't seen that, please have a look at it if you can. I'll just hop back into the presentation. So that's where we got to at sort of the middle of last year, and moving forward to this year, we started off with the plan to deliver several of these workshops to start to look at each of those key priority areas. And the aim was to identify certain products or services, or if you want algorithms, which are at that pre-operational stage. That is, they're ready to go out and be delivered as continental, sort of national scale products and services in an operational basis, which is, they're accessible 24/7, 365 days a year. There's all of the appropriate metadata, licensing, and everything else is set up around it that you can use it. I am going to introduce a difference here to research infrastructure and operational. I'm aware some research infrastructure is operational. Research infrastructure in Australia, even though yes, some of it is operational, in general, it's not 24/7. It's not 7 days. It's not 7 days a week. It's not 365 days a year. If things go wrong, they may not get fixed immediately, and there's also not sort of longevity or consistency sometimes. So ideally, if we want products to be usable in our government agencies, we want them in that operational basis. So we need to put that in place. So that's what's driving what we're doing at the moment, and we're looking at vegetation. So prior to the workshop, we did a short sort of online survey to check what people thought were key products, and that essentially came back with fractional cover, change in the extent of different types of vegetation, and then vegetation structural change as well. We didn't get a lot of response to that survey, but it was a checkpoint. So the workshop this week has had 3 parts. The first part was a mix of government agencies at national and state and territory levels with researchers and other groups. And that was to essentially go through and look at what were the key pre-operational vegetation products that were considered essential for Commonwealth, state and territory applications. And that was done through as basically a set of question and answers and a survey. And those parameters, or sorry, not parameters, those products could be grouped roughly into fractional cover vegetation information. So that's not just MODIS, it's Landsat, it's Sentinel. It could be monthly products, could be seasonal products, those sorts of things. Some of it is operational, some of it's not. The other type of information was vegetation structure, some not just classifications that's shown there, but looking at height and also maps of vegetation extent that take it into account. So I'm summarising, but there's a lot more detail in the workshop summaries there. So they were identified as the 2 groups of products that needed to be transitioned through to operational. Yesterday we went through and talked about how would you actually do that transition, within government agencies in terms of moving from, algorithms which are implemented in research infrastructure, where they basically need continual refresh of funding to update them. How do you bring those to an operational context? How do you bring state or territory-based products and services to a national operational context? And how do you take research-based products, which someone might be serving off their university infrastructure? How do you move that? So we started that process yesterday in the transition planning. That process also touched on, rather than building a range of different versions of data sets and storing them, moving to the idea of having verified algorithms which could be used in different areas, and then they run off a central sort of, store of data as well. But that's an idea for discussion later on. So today is meant to be about vegetation properties across Australia, and what are some of the key research directions that we need to follow, to, one, fit in with, what's happening at a state and national level, but 2, to help provide direction to our research communities in universities, research institutions, and also at sort of guiding documents. So like in the Australian Research Council, looking at NCRIS priorities in terms of how we direct what we do in our area. And the idea is to link it all up. So that's the bigger picture context of why we're here today. Just a diagram just to illustrate some of that, which some of you have already seen before. It sets out what we're trying to do. The top level of that diagram is showing technical readiness levels from research through to operational on the left-hand side as you face it. The groups that are involved in those agencies, and I recognise they span different areas. And then across the bottom are the mechanisms that we use to do that. So Earth Observation for Government Network, which is that green arrow at the top there, it is about how we take research proven or tested algorithms and products through to being able to be delivered and used at a Commonwealth level, but also at a state and territory level as well. Joint Remote Sensing Research Program is the one that sits below Earth Observation for Government Network. That's in there. That's a state-based and territory-based program, which is really has research, but it's flowing through to operational at a state and territory level, but not to a Commonwealth level. The space agency is down the bottom, and I'll come back to its role in a minute. But, one of the primary goals of Earth Observation for Government Network is to better link our research communities, our research infrastructure through to our government agencies. So we avoid duplication, we make sure that we're being complementary, and that make sure our government agencies have the best on offer science, the best on offer sort of algorithms to use and way to do that. That we use our research infrastructure to pull things together and test and get it working, and that our research is directed into areas where there is going to be application in here as well. So in one sense, Earth Observation for Government Network is government focused, but it is about bringing all of these components together so we can work more effectively down the track. This was the summary, well, it's actually a copy of some of the survey responses we had on Tuesday, where we came up with those two groupings of what's key vegetation information that's pre-operational and that state and territory and Commonwealth agencies need as soon as possible. So the top group is roughly around vegetation structure products, and you can see it's actually got to do with physical dimensions as well as types of community classifications and also height. The second grouping is fractional cover, and it's not just MODIS fractional cover or Landsat, it's a whole range of others. And the lists in there are products which some of you probably consider operational, but they're not quite there at a national level. The third group are other ones that were mentioned, but they're going to be covered in follow-on workshops in our series. Okay, so yesterday what we did was basically have a look at how we could actually move from pre-operational to operational and make things work properly. And that needed to take into account sort of the structure of all the groups doing Earth observation. So the top part of this diagram is the space agency and its roles. The middle are all the different groups which are involved in Earth observation in Australia. So we have non-government organisations, so like a WWF, Nature Conservancy, Bush Heritage. We have industry, and industry there are the people that take imagery and turn it into products and services, and that's everything from one-person companies to big multinational companies. We have our university research and education sector, research institutes. We have research infrastructure in NCRIS, so particularly TERN and IMOS and AusScope, which are relevant to Earth observation. And then we've got our government agencies, particularly state, and territory and Commonwealth, who also bring Earth observation in and use it, and then defence. So Earth observation for government, as you can see, this is a refined version of that other diagram. We're trying to link across these areas as well. Just to highlight, one of the points that came up yesterday was, how does this process of informing government activities relate to industry and NGOs? And that's going to be a bigger discussion later on, because both of these groups are now starting to produce and are able to access the data, the algorithms, the people that they were producing very similar products to what's used down here at the moment on a range of scales. So yesterday was more government focused, but looking at our context. One other point we did talk about was governance yesterday. Who sets standards for doing this? And there was some discussion about the Australian Government Earth Observation from Space Working Group, which was previously ran from 2013 to 2018, as far as I know, and it was meant to do this sort of coordination. It isn't operating, I think, at the moment. What we do have at the moment that's operational is the Space Agency has an Earth Observation Technical Advisory Group. That group and the agency is about to release a roadmap for the next 5 years for how the agency is going to support development of industry and government and research in Earth observation. So that's something that we'll be aligning with and we'll use to push things along. And that's important because it gives us ability to access funding and leverage in a range of spaces. I'm not going to do that. Okay, so today, back to what we're doing today. And just change the screen. Okay. So hopefully you can see on the screen now the agenda for today. And it is about the research side of things. So we've been through 1 and 2. So what we're looking at today is really what are key research directions for, measuring, mapping, monitoring vegetation properties using Earth observation data, and how that potentially fits into what we're going to do here in this network. So that's the idea of today. What we'll have is essentially 2 sessions. This is the first one, which will lead into a bit of an exercise. We'll have a break, probably around 20 to 2, and then come back after the break and look at how to go forward with these things. So at the end of today, we will ideally walk away from here with starting to define key aspects of vegetation, Earth observation that need to be looked at in the research context, and then also where we can direct that information so that that research can be conducted. And today is a start. And I think I'm just going to scroll back to the beginning of the agenda here. If you look at the top of that document, for these vegetation workshops, it says this is an experiment. This is the first time we're doing this. So we are working out the best way to do it as we go, and we're quite interested in feedback as to whether it's working or not later on. It is a complex but necessary process as well. So I might ask Alexis McIntyre just to provide some context in relation to how this fits into needs of Commonwealth government at the moment, particularly on the research side of things. So I'll just stop sharing there, Alexis.
Hi everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I think that so far, although I haven't been able to participate as much as I would have liked, these sessions have been really valuable. From my perspective, the need for coordination and planning across how we transition research products into products that can be used for government, and also how we can communicate what the government actually needs to inform decision-making processes out to the broader Earth observational community was something that became apparent while I was working at Geoscience Australia, and it's only become more, I guess, urgent in my current role now as the Acting Director for Spatial Enablement within the Department of Agriculture, Water and the Environment. And from my perspective, there's still a big gap between what is possible technically within the Earth observation community, what's already had significant investment and development, and the information that's coming through from that, and what's actually being used on the ground for decision making within government. And we have some people who are tasked with trying to connect those two different aspects within the department. But it's not enough to be able to make sure that the government is actually informed by the best science and by the best information possible on a range of different decisions. And that can be anything from the regulation space, so how we effectively act as a regulator for federal legislation under the EPBC Act, through to how we invest. How do we best make use of limited funding to target the right places when we're attempting to achieve environmental outcomes? We use information from a number of you already in informing these decision-making processes, but there's still I think, a significant gap between what is technically possible and what's actually put into practice in an operational sense. And that's what we'd like to try and address here, is how do we actually plan and coordinate that transition from what is possible through to what is actually used within government. It's a gnarly problem. It's one that we haven't successfully solved at any jurisdictional level. But I'd say that Commonwealth level is the level of government that still needs, I guess, that next level of coordination to be able to effectively use appropriate information at a national scale to be able to inform our decisions. So that's really the context from me, is I think there's so much fantastic work that's occurring across Australia that's being developed for particular use cases in particular jurisdictions or particular locations, but there's still a lot of effort that's required before that is going to be able to support decision making at that federal level, and in a way that promotes consistency nationally for the decisions that need to be made. So we're looking to just put processes around planning and coordination and bring in all of the expertise that's available within Australia to be able to improve on where we are now. So I'll leave it there, but thank you everyone for contributing to this effort.
Thanks very much, Alexis. And I think just to clarify, I mean, the outputs from this we are going to produce in a report. You know, it's going to acknowledge, you know, what is going to come out of it. But the outcomes from what we're doing today, you know, is going to be sets of activity that will drive, you know, what's happening in each of the communities we just talked about. Right, so just moving forward, the work that we've done previously to summarise, I guess you put it there, what products were, you know, at research stage, you know, that had been tested at like a site or a catchment scale, what products, work at a state and territory level and what works nationally, what states and territories are doing, what the Commonwealth was doing. We've put into this Earth observation capability database in a very loose sense of the word. What you're looking at on the screen is the online spreadsheet, which lists a number of those vegetation products, their source, the category that they fit into, and then the color coding is the operational status, where green's operational, in a sense of 24/7, 365 days a year. And then as it moves towards yellow, orange, and red, it becomes less operational and more research. So that was what was established last year. Any exercise like this, it's not going to be complete. And in our field in particular, it does change quite regularly. So our aim is to, that's the one resource that we will continue to update and make publicly available for people to use. So that's one of the things that we're looking at. Okay. All right. Now, just getting into an exercise before we have a break here. Part of the reason for asking everyone on this meeting is you're all involved in some form or another of active research on using Earth observation, the geostationary satellites, low Earth orbiting satellites, aircraft, drones, to map, monitor, measure vegetation, and often, are also doing a lot of field work with it. Some of you have a research focus into industry, some of you have a research focus into government, and some of you are government groups who also have to do research as well. So what you all have is different sort of unique experience and good first-hand working knowledge of what does and doesn't work for you. So what we'd like to do for the next essentially 10 or 15 minutes at the most is to get you to access that knowledge and just provide us with some feedback on three key points there. So item 4 there in the agenda is, what do you consider are key research directions for those 2 vegetation type products? So the first one is fractional cover information, and then the second one is vegetation structure. Vegetation structure can involve, it could be height, it could be biomass, okay? It could be a more advanced version of the current NVIS classification. It could be more locally adapted for that. So there actually is a form to fill out for this, and Larissa's just posted you the link to that form. And when you open it up, it'll look like this to begin with. And it has your introductory details, and then it is going to ask about those product sets there. And the 3 questions, what are the priority research topics in 3 areas? So the first one's algorithm development and testing. The second one is field measurement programs for calibrating, validating our algorithms. And then the last one is to do with new sensors themselves, but also new processing and delivery models as well. So, essentially where we're moving to a system where, everyone's data and processing is done in one central space. Maybe each organisation has its own algorithms that they use. How's that going to work? So what we're asking for now is if we spend 10 minutes essentially filling that out. So think about, you can pick fractional cover, it can be vegetation structure. Think about, is algorithm development what needs to be done? If so, what is it? Is it field calibration and validation? Is it the development of more complete or more effectively coordinated calibration validation programs, to measure a certain aspect of, it could be vegetation structure. And then the last one is, the new data sets that are coming online. I mean, as an example, I mean, NASA's JEDI data set and basically the full waveform LiDAR globally that you're looking at there. It could be the ESA biomass mission that you're looking at there. What are some of the new approaches there? I mean, is it drone-based LiDAR for doing local area, community classification based on structure? So have a think about what you could write in there. If you're not sure, type it in the chat window and we'll try and answer. And then we'll run this through to probably for another, let's say 10 or so minutes, and then we'll have a break after that. So I'm going to go on mute and let everyone have a go at that. If you've got questions, please type it in the chat window and we'll try and deal with them. Okay, we're getting close to break time, folks. So one point I will mention is this is a starting point to the exercise, and we will revisit these questions. So, you know, if you're sort of hitting a brick wall with this now, not to worry. We'll come back to you in a follow-up email and give you another opportunity to provide input to this. And we recognise it does sometimes take some time to think and put appropriate answers in there as well. So, all right. So just tying things up there, if you can just finish off what you're typing in there, that's great. One of the things we normally did at these workshops was get everyone to introduce themselves. Given that we've got 42 people online at the moment and a limited time for this, we probably won't do that. So apologies today for doing that. What I will ask you to do as we go to a break for 5 minutes now to get up and have a stretch is if you could just type in your name and your organisation and what you're interested in with vegetation remote sensing briefly, that would be really good. So if you can do that now, and then we'll have a break for 5 minutes and then reconvene and come back into, well, what are ways that we can implement these steps going forward? Okay, we might get going again. Thanks everybody for going through and providing input on the form and also in the chat window. What we're going to do now is just think forward a little bit. We've really briefly touched on before, what are some of the priority areas of research that could be done. Now the next thing is how. So this is under item 5 where we've got planning and building capacity in this area. And this is about research capacity, research infrastructure, as well as the capacity for our state and territory agencies and Commonwealth agencies essentially to do work using Earth observation data. NGOs and industry are in this discussion as well, but we'll bring them in a little bit later in our process in this. So what we've suggested is there are 3 areas that we could potentially look at where we could improve what we're doing from an Earth observation research point of view. The first one's what we're calling national strategic. So that's where you would be looking at defining, these are the key priorities, as a country, our research needs to be addressing for addressing key government and societal issues in Australia, but also to basically contributing to international initiatives as well. And they would be used to drive things like, our Australian Research Council grants, Commonwealth institution grants, research priorities within CSIRO and state agencies. Now I know our research priorities have their own set procedures for being set in each of those institutions, but often they do refer to national plans and other things in those areas. I know a lot of you have been involved in decadal science planning in other countries as well. This is something which we could look at here in a much shorter form, more effective way as well. So when we talk about national strategic directions, it's what sort of activities could we do nationally to focus our research effort, which you could apply to research programs where you get groups of people working in those areas, submitting proposals and starting to collaborate and do a whole range of things as well. The next one's research infrastructure. Obviously we have there is a national research infrastructure roadmap, an investment plan. It does include Earth observation as a capability to be built. I know a lot of you are involved in parts of NCRIS capabilities. I think this is my probably biased professional view of it. A lot of our Earth observation activities have been pushed to the edge in those different research infrastructure facilities. The IMOS might be an exception. They have quite well set up field capabilities linked to imaging programs and that. But I think, things like TERN, we're still there, but not at the level, ideally that we should be, and we tend to get pushed out to the side on things. How do we, is there a way of going for a push in research infrastructure, particularly around calibration, validation, or other activities that could help us? And then the last one is, what should we be, letting our universities know, when they're refining, their undergraduate curriculum, they're reviewing their postgraduate coursework curriculum, they're looking for directions, for their masters and PhD students, and also, in other sectors where people are doing, spatial data processing. What are the areas that we want people to build skills in as well? That is a challenging area for all of us to find people in Australia who have appropriate experience, skills and qualification. And, you know, this is a way that we could start to have a conversation around addressing that. So what we're going to look at now is the next part in that, I guess, questionnaire, if you want, for want of a better word. The last part of it, I'll just share my screen again. Again, this is a start to thinking about, if we were to push forward Earth observation, remote sensing, what would we put forward as national strategic issues? Is it, as an example, that, you know, we should be developing, you know, a capacity where we have a constellation of medium-sized Earth resource monitoring satellites, and we're building the capability to do the processing on board those satellites on the ground and distributing products and services. Are there certain areas of vegetation mapping and monitoring that are nationally important where we should be focusing research on coming up with best practice? I'll give you two examples now. The extent of native vegetation communities and clearing and regrowth. Yes, those are operational activities, but they're things is wrong word, the products and services which could be looked at and potentially improved down the track. So the national strategic issues are things like that. Then there's the research infrastructure. You know, what would you push to help us do that more? Do we need dedicated calibration, validation, you know, infrastructure programs? What about student skills and development? And, you know, is there anything else? So similar exercise before. Next 10 minutes, have a go at, you know, what your thoughts are. It could be in each of those areas or one of those areas, what you would put in place there to move things forward. You know, and I know I'm asking you to do it off the top of your head now, but all of you live in this area and work in this area and have done so for a long period of time. So I think you have some pretty good ideas what you would want in place. So I'll go on mute again, and if people got questions, got problems accessing the form, type it in the chat window, and then you know, once we get to 10 minutes, we'll do a summary and then talk about here's where we're going to next. So I'll pop on mute. Okay, folks, looks like we're getting pretty close to time on that one. So as I said with the previous exercise, we will come back to everyone on this with a follow-up. So if you did want to put in more information or have more considered responses, that they can go in at that time as well. I acknowledge this is a slightly different way of doing things, but we are trying to introduce a concept, start it going, and then get feedback. I think a lot of you are probably doing a lot of online meetings at the moment, so we didn't think it was appropriate to try and run a 4 or 5 hour Zoom or Microsoft Teams meeting to try and do something like this as well. So thanks for all your input on that as well. So in terms of what we're trying to do with all of this and how we move to the next stage, I just wanted to just say a few points of clarification and then just open it up for comments at the moment for people in terms of going forwards with this. So what will happen is, based on the input that we've had this week, the EOGM project team, so Larissa and myself, will put them together into a summary document, and that will then have a next set of steps to go forward, where we need to basically refine and obtain some more details on points that were raised during the meetings, particularly around what are those key products that we need to move forward to that operational national level, and then who is actually going to be responsible for doing that, and how is it going to be resourced. So that process, will probably play out over the next month and a half, and it is something which will be essentially mediated through Ella and Norman at Geoscience Australia, and then with Alexis and Shanti in their respective departments as well. So we'll come back with more input, and the aim is to come up with, essentially for vegetation, here's an assessment of the way forward for operational products, but also an update on our capability database and an indication of, this is the range of activities across the country that people are involved with. So that's the plan for doing that. And just to be clear about that, this is an activity that's funded through Geoscience Australia's Digital Earth Australia program, where we're trying to pull groups together to actually do this. So that next step document that we're aiming to is what we're calling this Vegetation Products Transition Plan, which we would hope everybody to be engaged in, because it is research through operations. It is something where we'll make sure that it has that RACI framework applied. So, we've got, this was asked for a range of people yesterday, that it is a process where people are responsible, they're accountable for activities, and consult with the right people and inform everyone on the process. So we will do that. There are some separate workshops coming up on other products, which some of you will be involved with, and hopefully what you'll see is a transition from what we did over the last 3 days to something which is a little less clunky and more efficient use of everybody's time. So the next one will be land cover and land use. After that, we'll be looking at water, and then fire in the landscape as well. If people do want to help out in terms of directing what we're doing at a national level, and in terms of reaching out to the community, doing these sorts of activities, Earth Observation Australia, which is sort of base national grouping that we have, is definitely open for more volunteers there. The other thing I'll mention is that we were going to be running our inaugural Advancing Earth Observation Forum in September this year in Brisbane. A number of you had actually submitted abstracts for that and expressed interest in running workshops. Due to the current pandemic situation, we took the decision 2 weeks ago to postpone that to 2021 at the end of August. So I'm mentioning that because the plan this year was that we would run an Earth Observation for Government Network workshop at this event and bring together the people in the different groups and basically discuss other ways forward. That will still happen in 2021. So I just wanted to reassure people that's still on, it's still in Brisbane. You know, it's essentially the next step of the Australasian Remote Sensing and Photogrammetry Conference, but with the format completely turned on its head to be much more interactive and bringing along, you know, our early career stage people and to basically grow what we're doing. So that's still happening from next year onwards, and you'll hear more about it. We will have a workshop feedback form as well to collect information on. I'm going to stop at that point and essentially go back to the group here. Now, we still have quite a large group of people online. I know today's been a little bit different maybe to what you expected. I guess what we did want to finish off today with was a brief sharing of ideas or thoughts on how we're actually tackling these priorities in research in terms of vegetation products. Is this the way to do it? Is there another way to do it? Should it definitely be linked into where government agencies are going? Should it be linked into where industry wants to go as well? Is there a more effective way to meet than this and extract information? So please type comments into the chat window, or if I'm going to stop sharing my screen, basically you could raise your hand or open up your mic, and I'll try and let everyone talk at the moment. And keep in mind that this is something that we're trying to keep as open as possible and get as much input as possible. So, yeah, any thoughts, good, bad, constructive, or good? You can think about it for a little bit. Essentially what we're trying to do is...
I've raised my hand, Stuart.
Sorry, I didn't see that.
That's all right. It's tricky, isn't it?
Yeah. Sorry, go for it. Sorry, Tim.
One thing, so what Alexis was saying, that really resonated me with what is possible to what is used. And for Alexis and our colleagues in state government departments, what I'd really like to see is a flow chart of a decision-making process. Is that how do you currently make your decisions? And that will allow sort of some people in the EO realm or in this meeting to better understand, to better tailor the research that we can do so that it can be used for impact. So for example, I'll just give a brief example, is that if you're interested in irrigation compliance, is that if your agency's mandate is to go and have a chat with landholders who are potentially stealing water, then the timeliness of the information is critical. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you're involved in taking a landholder to court and you're going to be questioned by a Queen's Counsel, a QC, about the accuracy of your estimates, your satellite retrieval estimates of water area, actual evapotranspiration, all the rest of it, then accuracy is the key. So if we understand those flow charts as to how you make decisions and how you want to use the data, then we can tailor research and operational products to provide that information for you. So there's a lot of remotely sensed data. We want to get from that data to information, and then hope from that information to a bit of knowledge, and then maybe we'll get the odd drop or two of wisdom. But that's something I'd really, the more structure that can be placed on decision-making processes, then the better we can, you know, as a community, that we can provide information to assist with those decision-making processes.
Thanks, Tim. I think that's really pertinent, and it really gets into, you know, that research end of what we're trying to do and link those groups, because if we're able to access that sort of information, it you know, whether you're dealing with looking at, you know, where water is in the landscape, whether you're looking at, you know, restoration measures or vegetation clearing, it's that whole sort of workflow process. I think that would resonate with a number of people here, and it's often one of our large challenges. But this is good because it's part of the discussion that we can also bring back to the Commonwealth agencies and state and territory agencies.
Yeah, I think the workflows are critical. They underpin it all.
Thanks, Tim.
You've got to make sure there's, for example, that if a government department uses Firefox or whatever it is, that they can access the database. You know, I've heard of some instances where it's the preferred internet, browser that prevents people from accessing various databases. You know, so there's it's nothing. You know, it really is technological.
Yeah, but there was one of the things that came up yesterday in the discussion that was started, but I think will be helpful from like the government community to the research community, is the difference between operational and authoritative algorithms or data sources. Well, I just say authoritative data sources point of truth as well. So that's something we need to take on board in terms of, you know, there'll be a whole range of operational products, but which is the one to use. And I think we're also moving to a situation where, as I alluded to at the start of today, you know, that yes, there will be a Commonwealth government product, but there may be an NGO version of the same product. And then there could be a private company has another version. And it's, you know, that's a space we're used to working in as a research community. But for a government, it's like, which one?
Yeah, you know, that's a really good point. Like I think with NCAS, the National Carbon Accounting System, is that there are, because it's used for international regulation, and you know how, you know, that there's science improvements that could be made, but would that change the current and retrospective carbon balances for the nation? And so, you know, the system potentially calcifies.
Yeah,
and
it's
that's
we're seeing. Yeah, we're seeing such rapid technological change with the data sets we can access, plus the processing and delivery options now. It's how do we as a community engage with that and enable it to be used effectively down the track is
great question.
And I guess one of the other points that we brought up earlier, Tim's just talked about a process one from a sensor point of view. You know, we are seeing a number of new satellite constellations being launched, you know, not just in that multispectral space, but also now looking at imaging radar and others. Is that something that, you know, do we push it on is it a technology evaluation thing that we need to think, or focus we need to have in this plan, or you know, what do we need to do to get the research community in a place that it's able to deal with these ongoing likely changes? I mean, do we need some sort of, you know, technology development plan, or basically, you know, a technology projection that we could look at to know that this is what's likely to be coming? So we need to be building our capabilities. I mean, what do people think about focusing on the tech side as opposed to the information we need side? And if it's all too confusing, it's okay. It's 2 o'clock on Friday afternoon.
I'll make a comment, Stuart. I think it might have been Wendy who made the point yesterday about the range of different users in terms of technology accessibility, whether it's kind of a smallhold farmer or it's a large corporation. And obviously large corporations have better access to be implementing technology solutions. Maybe it is like, maybe what you're saying, maybe it is a technology issue. You should be focusing as much on delivering not just products from an authoritative point of view, but delivering the capacity to implement methods that are kind of, if you're a smallhold farmer, you don't have the resources to, you're just relying on what you've got at the moment, and they're products that are authoritative. But it's not necessarily that hard, I think. And Peter made that point yesterday too, about it's not that hard if we implement the right solution, but they can play around with stuff too, with pretty advanced methods.
Yeah.
So I think technology is just as important as the product algorithms at the moment.
Okay, good. Thanks.
Is it all right, Stuart, if I just follow on that
Yeah,
comment?
go, Wendy.
From a government perspective. So I find a lot of this technology stuff really exciting, but I guess wearing a state government hat, particularly in a state like Western Australia that's so big and vast, is that all the things that we roll out from a policy perspective, we always have to keep in mind that sometimes these little guys can be quite vocal. We have folks who sit outside the range of internet capacity, and we've got to be very conscious when we roll out some of this from a state perspective that we just acknowledge that not everybody has equal access. So my stakeholders is everybody in the state. So, that's just something in the forefront of how I have to communicate. So for me, a lot of this is listening to a lot of this research and trying to improve how we communicate what government is doing and how we're making decisions using this technology to make sure we incorporate those small landholders who, as I have had handwritten letters, don't have a computer. So, this is just the very reality of from wearing that policy hat when we start to communicate these things that can be very sophisticated and overwhelm stakeholders. We have to be able to actually sometimes draw it back down to the simple strengths and weaknesses of how we're using something that they may not fully understand to our stakeholders. So I guess that's from drawing on some of this, for me, listening to the research perspective and how I need to communicate what these tools do to make everybody's life easier. And sometimes it's like it's more efficient, it shortens timelines, and those are things that everybody can relate to, regardless of all the fancy stuff that's happening in the background that's allowing us to make those decisions. So
thanks, Wendy. That context is really critical to hear, and that would possibly partly fit in with what Tim was talking about, like if there's a flow, that sort of decision flow chart, but then it's who's using it at the end and what they're using it through. I think there's always going to be a tension for us between what has to work operationally and then what could be in the future, and trying to enable enough testing and verification to be done of the new material so that governments can progress and change. Takes me on to just the last point I wanted to cover today, calibration and validation activities. This is, we perform a lot of these activities in individual groups. CSIRO does a lot in this space for a range of different satellite missions. It's also something like the Marine Observing System does this. There's some coordinated approaches and other approaches that are not coordinated. As a community, I think as some of you know, we have had one go at putting in an NCRIS proposal at a calibration validation capability, which for a whole range of reasons didn't go forward. I don't think they were the right reasons, but that's my biased view. We're now at a point where it's quite clear that in terms of developing our research, our government and our industry capability with Earth observation, that it's possible to push this area up again and look at enabling this to be funded properly and done well across, terrestrial attributes, more of the surface energy balance attributes. So I know the Met Bureau does a lot already, but also bringing that more into the space for satellite sensors, and then also enabling more linkage between terrestrial and marine, and enabling our marine calibration validation facilities for physical biological oceanography to be improved as well. So as a country, we're in a unique situation with a really big range of different environments. And that's one of the other good things about today is if you look at everyone who's online, we're pretty much hitting every state and territory. We've done really well across our research organisations, getting across our universities, and we've also got state and Commonwealth agencies in here. So this is a good, diverse meeting, and that's our strength in going forward as well. So any thoughts on national calibration validation capabilities? Other than, yes, we need them. And
I guess the only thing I'll just jump into, Vicar, again, is that I think we need a range of flux towers in irrigation and riparian vegetation areas. Is that if we look at Ausflux, that network that turned, have done a great job building up, I think when it started from maybe 2 or 3 flux towers to now over 30. But we don't have any flux towers located in those agricultural areas where there's high, land management and high water use and continuous water use.
I think if you look at agriculture and then horticulture, that's definitely a need where there's an industry pull. We have government enabling us to work in those areas. That's something for us to think about a bit more as well. So
and plantation forestry as well.
Yes, yep. All right, other thing to put on the table, calibration validation as a commercial service. I don't know how many people have thought about that. As in, would companies pay to access and use, and would government agencies pay for services there? I don't know the answer to that question. That's why I'm just putting it out there.
Stuart, I might butt into there for one sec, just so I'm more active in this meeting. My thought of, are we using the existing site information enough? We always try to get more and more variables, but have we got enough utilization? And for instance, Corvage, I know that we put it into 10. How much of Corvage is actually being used to actually validate some of the products that we try to produce? And there's thousands of sites.
Yeah, it is an ongoing challenge. I think part of starting to address that's dialogue like this, and then working out what's there and what's possible to go forward with, and what's critical. So, but that is a good point. Thanks, Harry. Sure. Actually, Stefan's just put a really good point in, which was around the direction I was starting to go through. Stefan, did you want to elaborate on that? Private industry providing CalVal, or do you just want to leave it at the text point?
Yeah, well, we only hear about government agencies providing a service to commercial remote sensing providers, but this can go the other way around. And in fact, I'm doing that already. So I'm providing CalVal services to government agencies, not in Australia at the moment, but overseas. So I think we have to keep our mind more open.
Yep.
And there are certain things that, especially small companies, and that's also a thing that sort of irritates me, that industry is always seen as the big players, as the Boeings, Airbus, and whatnot. But industry covers actually a wide range, and there are certain things that small businesses can do in a way more efficient way than any government agency or university can do.
Yeah. I think that's an excellent point. Peter's also noted about Queensland government there as well. And your last point, Stefan, about timeframes for being able to respond quickly is really important there too. I'm just conscious of time, everyone, and I'm going to draw it to a close there. I just, again, reiterate thanks to everybody for attending and contributing. I know this was challenging. It is the start of a process where we can hopefully engage across this whole spectrum and put the information together to help us all in a useful way. This is an activity that the Space Agency and the Earth Observation Roadmap are keen to support in going forward, as well as they want to see those industry linkages through to government and research as well. So I'd just like to close by thanking Larissa as well for setting up and running this. Larissa did post an exit survey. I've just posted it again. So if you do have any other thoughts on what we should or shouldn't do or could do better next time, please let us know. But we will send a follow-up email at the beginning of next week to let you know about the next steps and how to stay engaged with this. So with that, thanks everybody for your attention, and hope you have a good weekend, and we'll be in touch again soon. See ya.